Dust, a woman on her knees in cracked orange clay, turning a hand-crank drill no wider than a broomstick. Copper pipe glints in the sun. Behind her, a rig built from scavenged fence posts and a tractor winch leans at an angle that shouldn't hold weight but does. Cicadas scream in the heat. A dog watches from the shade of a dead persimmon tree, tail flat in the dirt. The woman doesn't look up. She turns the crank, turns it again. Somewhere down that hole, 6 days in, something metal clinks against stone, and she smiles like she already knows what's coming. If you've ever bet everything on a hunch nobody else believed in, you'll want to see how this one ends. Hit subscribe before we go further, and drop a comment below telling me what part of the country you're watching from tonight. Belhaven Hollow sits in the folded hill country of Izard County, Arkansas, where the roads narrow to gravel and the radio signal gives out past the second church. It is the kind of place where everyone's grandmother is buried within walking distance, and everyone's well runs a little drier each August than the year before. Marlena Doss had lived there all 39 years of her life, the last 11 of them alone with her daughter Addie Ray, ever since her husband's truck went off the switchback above Cotter Creek. She kept 40 acres of hardscrabble hillside that had been in her family since the Depression, land too steep to farm, too rocky to graze, and now, according to the county assessor, too far behind on its taxes to keep. The letter had come in June, stamped in red. Notice of delinquent tax deed, subject to public auction in 90 days absent payment in full. Marlena had gone into town to ask for time. The bank manager, a clipped, tidy man named Cordell Handy, had folded his hands on his desk and told her plainly that no lender in 3 counties would extend credit against dry hillside with no water rights and no timber worth cutting. "This land is worthless, Mrs. Doss," he'd said, not unkindly but final as a closing door. "I'd advise you spend your money elsewhere." Word of the auction notice made its way around Belhaven the way such things do in small places, through the pews, through the feed store, through the party line still strung along Route 9. Her neighbor Vestal Combs, who ran cattle on the bottomland below Marlena's ridge, told anyone who'd listened that the Doss woman had lost her sense entirely, spending her last dollars on drill bits instead of a lawyer. "She's up there witching for water on a hill the county geologist himself called Dead Rock," Vestal said at the co-op, shaking her head. "90 days to save that place, and she's playing at well digging like it's 1930. Marlena heard the talk. She kept turning the crank anyway. The rig itself was a strange sight, cobbled together from what Marlena could find without spending money she didn't have. An old fence post tripod, chain from the barn, a hand auger her late husband had used for post holes, fitted with pipe extensions she'd welded herself in the shed behind the house, sparks flying late into the night while Addie Ray held the flashlight. "Mama, Mr. Handy at the bank says there's no water under that ridge," Addie Ray said one evening, 12 years old and already carrying her mother's stubborn set of the jaw. "Said the county did a survey years back. Said it's all shale up there." "Surveys miss things," Marlena said, not looking up from the crank. "Your great-grandfather used to say a hillside talks to you if you're patient enough to listen. I've been patient 11 years, Addie Ray. I can be patient a while longer." What she didn't say, because she didn't fully understand it herself yet, was the memory that kept pulling her back to that particular spot on the ridge, a low place where moss grew green even in July drought, where the ferns stayed curled and damp when everything around them crisped to brown. Her grandmother had shown her that spot when Marlena was a girl, called it the cool corner, and told her that cool ground in dry country always had a reason. She'd sunk savings she didn't have into pipe and bits. She sold her mother's canning jars at the flea market in Melbourne. She traded 3 days of house cleaning for a used compressor. Every dollar went down that hole instead of toward the tax bill, and by late July she had drilled 60 feet with nothing to show for it but blistered palms and a growing quiet from the neighbors who used to at least tease her to her face. The drought that summer was the worst Izard County had seen in a decade. Cotter Creek shrank to a trickle of brown water. Vestal Combs's cattle stood bunched under the one shade tree left on his bottomland, bawling for water he had to haul in by truck twice a day. The county extension office issued a notice limiting well usage for irrigation. Grass fires broke out twice along the Ridge Road, and the volunteer department posted burn bans on the church door alongside the auction notice for Marlena's land, which now had a date circled in red, September the 9th. By August, 60 days remained. Marlena was down to 40 feet of pipe left in her stock and no money for more. She'd taken in laundry from 3 families in town to buy diesel for the compressor. Audie Ray had started keeping a chalk countdown on the porch post, scratching off a day each morning before school. 61 days, Mama, she said one morning, chalk in hand. I heard the crank change sound yesterday, Marlena told her. Softer, like it's chewing through something wetter than rock. Vestal Combs came by that week, not to mock this time but out of something closer to worry. He stood at the fence line watching her work the crank, sweat darkening the back of her shirt. Marlena, he said, I've known you since we was children. I don't like watching you throw good money into a hole in a drought year, on a hillside the state itself surveyed dry. Auctions coming whether that hole gives you water or not. You ought to spend what's left fighting handy on paper, not fighting rock with a hand drill. I appreciate you worrying, Vestal, Marlena said. But I've got 30 days and 40 feet of pipe, and I mean to use every foot of it. That same week, the compressor coughed, sputtered, and finally caught, driving the bit down through a final stubborn shelf of stone. And something in the sound of it, deep and hollow and wrong, made Marlena drop the crank and press her ear to the pipe. It happened on a Tuesday, 9 days before the auction, with the whole hillside gone brittle and pale from drought. The pipe shuddered. Then it groaned, a long metallic note like a held breath finally let go. Marlena stumbled back as a column of water shot upward through the casing, higher than the fence posts, catching the afternoon sun and throwing a rainbow clean across the ridge. It didn't stop. It kept coming, cold and mineral-smelling, pooling fast around the rig, and running downhill in a widening silver sheet toward the dry bed of Cotter Creek. Vestal Combs's cattle smelled it before anyone said a word. They broke from under their shade tree and came at a dead run, splashing into the new creek where an hour before there had been cracked mud. Neighbors came out onto porches up and down the hollow, drawn by the sound of lowing cattle and children hollering. Audie Ray ran barefoot down the ridge road screaming for her mother, then stopped dead at the sight of it, a wall of water where there had never been so much as a damp patch. By evening, the county's water resource office had a man out with a clipboard and a set of gauges, called in not for Marlena's sake, but because the sudden flow had shown up on a stream gauge 3 miles downstream and thrown off every reading on the river. He didn't have to explain anything. He knelt at the pipe, dipped a testing vial, and watched a swarm of dragonflies already gathering over the new pool, drawn the way dragonflies are drawn to standing water that means to stay a while. Cordell Handy drove out himself 2 days later, dress shoes soaked through in the mud before he'd gone 10 feet. He stood at the edge of what neighbors had already started calling Doss Spring, watching cattle from 3 farms drink their fill, watching a line of pickup trucks hauling water barrels up the ridge road, and said nothing at all for a long moment. Then he took off his hat, wiped his forehead, and made a call from his truck about halting the September auction pending review. The county bought the water rights to Doss Spring that autumn, enough to cover Marlena's taxes twice over and fund a pipeline down to the bottomland farms that had gone dry that summer. Vestal Combs was the first name on the list to hook up, and the first to show up unannounced with a truckload of gravel to help Marlena pave the ridge road proper. Cordell Handy sent a letter that November, brief and formal, informing her the county had reclassified her 40 acres as a protected watershed parcel, valuable now beyond anything the tax rolls had ever imagined. Audie Ray still keeps that chalk post on the porch, though the countdown is long since rubbed away. In its place, She's written a single line in her own handwriting, the day it came up. Marlena never did explain to anyone exactly why she trusted that mossy, damp corner of dead hillside more than a state survey. She only says her grandmother taught her to listen for the places where the ground stays cool in a drought, because thirsty land, like a thirsty person, always tells you the truth eventually.